most people want their hard work to mean something more than a paycheck. And I think that comes in the form of pride and quality of what they do.
Hey there, and welcome to Under the Roof, the official podcast of Baker Roofing Company. I'm Todd Kavanaugh.
And I'm Matt Elban, and we're here to connect the dots between field and office, leadership and crew, values and action.
In each episode, we dive into the stories, lessons, and updates that matter to our team.
From safety and career growth to company milestones and good old-fashioned storytelling, it's all about living out what makes Baker, Baker. Let's get into it.
Welcome back to Under the Roof. Today, we're talking about competitive strategy and why Baker's structure as an employee-owned company gives us real advantages in the marketplace.
Roofing industry is consolidating rapidly, right? So private equity has reshaped a lot of the landscape, and we're now one of the few large independent contractors left. But being different isn't always enough. The question is, does being employee-owned actually make us better transitioned or better positioned to compete and grow?
Our guest today is somebody you guys know. He's not only been at Baker for a long time, he's been on the podcast before. It's John Matthews, who helped make the strategic decision to transition Baker to 100% employee ownership. John, we want to dig into the competitive advantages this creates, not philosophically, but in real, practical terms that affect how we win work and serve our customers. So, John, welcome back to Under the Roof.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
John, before we dive into some of the heavy stuff, you've been in the industry for a long time. You've seen a lot of the changes that have taken place. What's maybe one thing about the roofing business that you think will never change, no matter who owns companies?
I think that we are an industry that is dependent on people. And I think regardless of organizational structures, the need for qualified, hardworking, and honest people is never going to go away. I mean, ownership structures are about business continuance, business strategy, and financial management. But everything else we do, every wheel that gets turned, every job that gets started is highly dependent on good people. And so I think we are a people-centric business. And while other industries are rapidly changing and moving away from that, we are one that I think continues to embrace that reality and also attempt to improve, not only the work conditions, but the opportunity that exists within that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the funny reality that I joke around with friends of mine is it's going to be a very long time before AI starts putting down roofs.
Yeah, or robots or anything else that's sort of wild thrown out there. We'll definitely probably see the evolution of some material products that ease the burden of installation. But as you all know, the products that get installed in our business are made to last 25 to 30 years. So it's not as if technology changes every 1 to 3 years. Technology enhancements may come in within a 20-year period, but broader technology sort of stays in place for at least the elongation of 1 or 2 generations of that technology over a 20 to 30-year warranty cycle.
I've been here for a long time, and the landscape has changed pretty broadly from when I started at this company, say back in 2003. So let's talk about that present landscape now. So when you've looked at what's happened to roofing over the past few years in terms of that organizational structure and the consolidation, the platform companies, the roll-ups, how has that changed the competitive environment that we're operating in now?
Yeah, I think the industry consolidation can take many forms. And when we talk about consolidation, we're really talking about companies coming together in some format to create a larger company or a more diverse company. And so those forms can be intentional, large roll-ups, For instance, Tecta, or say General Roofing, which we saw 25, 30 years ago in the industry, or even Roofing Corp of America, which we see now, where the overall corporate design and strategy is to basically acquire a certain size company in various markets and essentially gain market share by having, whether it's 5 or 10 or 50 or 100 companies under their umbrella that allow them to do work in a marketplace. Another form that we've seen come on the stage, or at least in the commercial roofing industry recently, has been the acquisition of smaller companies. So you take a company that's operating outside of the United States, or one that maybe operates, let's say, on the West Coast, and they want access to certain markets. So if you're Flynn in Canada, you want access to the US market, you set up a US organization. And the quickest way to do that is to acquire small competitive companies within the geographic territories or markets you want and roll them into that entity. And so I think as you see that, it doesn't necessarily change the competitive landscape initially, because most of those companies are operating under their same brand moniker or same management as they have had for years that was qualified and capable. But it's giving that larger umbrella access to different markets that it can then determine how best to do work in those markets. So, I think what consolidation does is, in essence, the top 10 roofing contractors in the country by volume tend to become more meaningful as competition because the breadth of where they install and the markets to which they engage have increased. So really what you have is sort of a separated market or industry where you have those that are well-known nationally or super regionally, and then those that really are operating under the radar or in a single market. And so what you find in that too is that multi-asset customers tend to utilize those in that top category, whereas single building owners and localized owners tend to utilize maybe a blend of both local market installers as well as super regional and national installers.
That makes a lot of sense. Thinking about consolidation and why it may happen, you've given some reasons for that. Some additional reasons that I kind of find interesting. Supposed to be advantages to scale, like centralized operations or buying power or a shared infrastructure. But you chose to keep Baker independent, right? So what competitive advantages does independence create that may outweigh some of those economies of scale?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So economies of scale can be achieved within a business regardless of the entity structure. It's more about replicating certain practices or processes over and over again, such that they either become automated or there's some repetitive or aggregate sense to it, and you can see efficiencies or savings in it. So whether we're an ESOP or not, we're a growth company, and I think that's where you tend to see economies of scale become really relevant to the business, is when you're in a growth company. And so obviously we have multiple branches throughout the southeastern United States. And while those branches have their own management and their own sort of, I would say, styles, they share a common culture, but they also share common processes. And so when you think about the processes that can be centralized, let's take example of lead generation. You're going to have localized sales reps in every market that are out developing leads, but you're also going to have the ability for a centralized business development format to be created, and for all of those 27 branch locations to sort of share in that cost, where each one individually would not be able to have that asset on its own, but in that shared scenario, we can actually have that, and it will help develop leads for them. The same is true if you look at our Premier Accounts program. Each individual branch probably wouldn't want to or be able to service a Premier Accounts program because they're looking at a 150-mile radius roughly around their office. But collectively, we are able to have a centralized Premier Accounts program that everyone sort of shares in the cost and benefits from the advantages of. And we're able to do that because collectively, 27 branches can perform on a very wide geographic basis for a lot of these customers. And so I think that's the difference. Economies of scale sometimes can also mean penny pinching. It's, hey, let's figure out the cheapest way to do this for all branches, make them all do that, and find a way to save a few cents on the dollar, nominal savings that can be achieved across a broader spectrum. Sometimes that's harder to achieve in our business because, again, it's so labor intensive that really what we're looking for more so than any sort of cost savings is economy of culture. And that is, how do we have one consistent culture across 27 branch locations that resonates to our employees and resonates to our customers? And we know it's not going to always be perfect, but the attempt of doing so is really where we think the benefit comes from, and where we think the power for growth, the motivation for growth, the incentive for growth comes from, is that we're all working towards a common goal. So I think you can look at economies of scale very differently. You can look at it from from what I call the P&L perspective, which is where can you achieve savings in shared resources, but you can also look at it from a culture, growth, and motivation perspective of coming together, working together. We have a lot more power than we would if we were operating as 27 individual companies.
Yeah, that's a great kind of answer. Also a great segue into my next question. We were talking about how maybe we make decisions as a company, right? But how do our customers actually make buying decisions? And so we might decide that we want to bring in-house our lead gen, right? Or our national accounts, our Premier Accounts department. But when we're sitting across as a company with some of our sales folks, or you or myself, we're sitting across from facility managers or a portfolio director, and they're evaluating us, not me, but Baker Roofing. They're evaluating their contractors. What matters to them? Why does Baker's ownership structure matter to them? How can that show up in a conversation?
You're going to have different perspectives on this as you talk to different people in the industry. But I think our perspective, again, going back to that common culture, and I think going back to the pride of quality that all of our operations staff has, I think at the end of the day, what the customer wants is they want attentiveness from us. They want to know that they're known. They want to know that we care about their project. And then beyond that, they want to know that we have some consistency in historical performance. That is, what is our quality? How does our quality continually perform over a broad spectrum of work? They want to know about the consistency of our operations and our communications. That is, are we consistent with what we say and what we do? And then I think the most important is they want honesty about the process. If you think about a sales process, a lot of companies are driven to make the sale, whether that means they get a contract, they get an LOI, they get a notice of award. They are pushed to make the sale. And I think, every sales organization has that element. But I also think it's incumbent on us as partners in each of these projects with our customers is to honestly talk to them about the realities, not only of their project, but of construction in general. And I think one of the first things we say is, well, construction's not perfect. There are going to be mistakes. We're going to go ahead and tell you that now. And they may be way outside of any of our control. However, over the past 100 plus years, we have been intentional about making sure that any of those mistakes were rectified and that at the end of the project, the customer has the product they want. And so I think it's about being attentive and being honest. Your track record speaks for itself. The way that structure, how does that structure enhance that message, I think, is that the ESOP structure suggests that these qualities remain important to this company in the future. People matter, history matters, performance matters, most importantly, honesty matters. It demonstrates this in action, not just words, which I think is really important. We can say all we want, but if we do something different, then essentially it's what we say is irrelevant. So as we look at a landscape where there are outside influences on companies, whether that be institutional ownership or umbrella ownership, institutional, let's just call that private equity. And I want to come back to that in a second. And then, just a larger construction company owning some contractor bases, you can, not always, but you can lose flexibility in how you operate, what your culture is and what your message is within those confines. Us being an ESOP, our employees sharing in all of this growth and the culture and being committed to the culture gives us the freedom and flexibility to really talk honestly with the customer about the realities of construction, the realities of what we do, and to show them that, a profit if we can, but a loss if we must is very real and very important to us. And the ownership or organizational structure we have doesn't change that, doesn't try to mitigate that. It embraces that, and it's part of our past, our present, and our future. So I think that sort of packages that. I think it's very simple, and I think every customer at the end of the day wants to be treated that way, regardless of how they enter into the pre-bid or the project. One thing I want to go back to is we talk a lot about things like private equity. And so in our industry, in a lot of industry, in almost every industry, there are companies, usually investment companies, that are big and small, that are out. And essentially what they want to do is develop ownership in a company where they have some knowledge, expertise, visibility. And usually they want to be at least a 50% owner in that company. But mostly they want to have maybe a majority control. Now, some for larger companies, that's not fiscally possible. So they're going to be happy with a lower percentage minority stake, but they're going to have a good stake in it. But if they have 50% plus ownership in a company, then those private equity firms, as we call them, or other investment firms, also have a seat or seats on the board, and they also have some form of control, not only of the P&L and the balance sheet, but also in terms of deciding the culture and the operations. And so as we talk about private equity, I want everybody to know that that's sort of what that is. It's a very general term. And the same is true for a larger construction company that wants to own different types of companies. Obviously, they're rolling up into their own umbrella and therefore their own style, culture, et cetera. But we hear terms like that tossed around and are really, it's confusing at times. And so it's good people know that. In the past, private equity had not necessarily been interested in, what I would call sort of niche businesses, especially high risk businesses like we have in roofing. But over time, I think many have realized the consistent, steady business model that roofing offers, which is it may not be glamorous, but it's technical and everybody needs the service and they need it on a continual basis. And so I think what they've recognized is you're not going to get these huge home run returns they're looking for in other businesses, but they might get very consistent single digit returns they can count on and manage over the course of time. And so I think that's where you're seeing a lot more entry of private equity into commercial roofing.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned the phrase economies of culture as an advantage, and I would tend to agree with that. I think that's an advantage that we at Baker Roofing have, right? That's one of the economies of scale we're looking for is economy of culture. So
I wrote that down too. And, I'm a language guy. I'm in marketing. And I wrote something else down that I just want to draw out too that you said, John. You said the ESOP structure suggests that these values that we talked about, consistency, stability, will remain consistent and endure in the future. And I think one of the operative words there, and I'm just going to draw it out because I think it's important and we know this, but the word was suggest. I think ESOP is a powerful platform But that suggestion part that you mentioned indicates that there is still an onus on all of us to ensure that it endures. It's not going to guarantee endurance. And I think hopefully with everybody understanding I've got a stake in this now, that they would ensure that that suggestion becomes a reality in the future, and that our platform of consistency and stability does endure for generations beyond us. So I like that.
Yeah, the burden, and I use burden loosely, but the burden of the legacy of always good work definitely falls on all of our shoulders now, and it's not a heavy burden. It's actually a light burden, because the premise behind profit if we can, loss if we must is simply that we're trying to do good business for ourselves and our customers. Yet at the end of the day, our commitment is to our customers, and our commitment is installing the product correctly. And really, if you think about it, that's just being open and honest with folks. And that is trying your best to do the best job you possibly can. And if there's a glitch in that you understand it and you go back and you honestly rectify it. And, there's a lot of clarity in being open and honest and earnest with folks. Your memory can be short because you're constantly promoting the same character and values within that. So, again, I say the burden of that legacy is on us, but it's also a wonderful opportunity to continue on a respected platform growth trajectory that we can all be proud of.
I love that concept. Mark has said that regularly. When you do the right thing the first time, you don't have to have a long memory, because you can rest in the foundation that I did this right.
So, John, one of the competitive advantages that we talk about internally is talent attraction and even talent retention, right? So the best people want to work for stable companies with clear futures, a clear vision, clear strategy. How does employee ownership help us recruit and keep better people than maybe our competitors?
I'm a firm believer that most people want their hard work to mean something more than a paycheck. And I think that comes in the form of pride and quality of what they do. It comes in the form of the relationships they build over time in their professional lives. I think it comes in the term of what they can do for their families over time. I think it's important to people to build a life, if you will, of their choosing, and then to see that grow. And so I think all of those get accelerated when, even mentally, if not physically, you go from being an employee of an institution to an owner of an institution, regardless of the shares you have or don't have. The fact that you have a thin slice of the pie and you feel the pride of that, and the pride of meaning that, I think it just accelerates each of those, where pride and quality, pride in your relationships, pride in what you can do for your families, it broadens. So, I think that obviously we've built a great culture that values people, that values their families over time. And I think everybody who has sort of been with Baker for a long time, or even a short time, recognizes that and appreciates that. I think all the organizational shift to an e-shop has done is accentuate that, accelerate that, and create additional value for folks within those lines. So, I don't think it's a game changer. I think it's a game enhancer, in that we all were moving in a common direction with purpose. And now we're all moving in that same common direction with perhaps a greater purpose, not only for the collective, but also for us as individuals.
Hey guys, so I actually think we're probably going to take a pause right here, because this has been really, really good. All of it, I think, is really helpful and valuable for us to understand the platform that we have now. So what I'd like to do is we're going to actually turn this into a 2-part episode. So we're going to break here, make this the end of episode 1, and pick it back up next time we see you. That wraps up this episode of Under the Roof. Thanks for joining us and being part of the Baker Roofing family.
If you liked what you heard, share it with your crew. Hit the follow button and keep the conversation going wherever you work.
We're here to keep you informed, inspired, and included, because the more connected we are, the better we work together.
And as always, we'll leave you with this. We shall do good work, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always good work. See you next time.